I will call to order, excuse me, the special city council. I'm actually calling two meetings to order at the same time right now. I'm calling both a special city council meeting to order and a special police board meeting to order. Yes, I'm acting as chair of both. So I'm hoping that that will work out and I'm not going to get into a situation where I'm challenging my own questions here. Yeah, anyway. We start meetings in New Westminster by recognizing and respecting that New Westminster is on the unceded and unsurrendered land of Halkomelem speaking peoples. We acknowledge that colonialism has made invisible their histories and their connections to the land. And as a city, we're learning and building relationships with people whose lands we're on. This meeting is not being live cast and not being live streamed, but it is being recorded on Zoom and will be available as a Zoom broadcast on the city website afterwards. We are being recorded and it will be available there for people to see. We have the only item on the agenda is the New Westminster Police Department budget. We asked, I think council asked, and I think police board also was asking that we have a better chance to share budget information that's coming out of the police board prior to us deeper conversation of the council on our budgets. So I don't know if we need a quick round table of people who are present in the room. Maybe everyone doesn't probably know each other, so we should probably do a quick round table, at least to folks who are on the horseshoe and what's the bottom part of a horseshoe called? And the foot, and the back. So maybe I will start. I'm Mayor Patrick Johnstone. I am the chair of the police board as well. And I will go to my left and we'll go around. Can we use our mics as much as we can for the online, so it's online recording? Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Go for it.
I'm Tasha Anderson, City Councilor. If you didn't catch it, that's Nadine Nagakawa, City Councilor.
Paul Manhas, City Councilor.
Amy Diane, Board Secretary.
Andrew Perry, New West Police Inspector Administration Division.
Paul Highland, Deputy Chief Constable.
Jacqueline Darren, Manager of Finance for the Police Department.
Dave Jansen, Chief Constable.
Patrick Wallone, Board Member.
Heather Boardsma, Board Member.
Drew Hart, Board Member.
Mary Trentadue, Board Member. Ruby Campbell, City Councilor.
Maurice McLeod, Acting Corporate Officer.
And who's in the back row?
Lisa Fatale, CAO.
Okay. Thank you. We will start. I believe that the Chief Constable has a presentation to start us off.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So I do have some notes I'll be looking at, but there'll be a few of us talking today, and we'll be have a PowerPoint presentation, but it's going to hopefully follow along the report that you all were provided. So thank you again for taking the time to meet together to learn about the NWPD and to discuss the NWPD's 2024 provisional budget. This is the third year in a row that the board and council have met to conduct this type of budget discussion, and hopefully everyone finds value in it, and it provides more clarity to the requests and assists the community in knowing more about our 2024 budget. So council is aware, this is the fourth time that the board will have met in an open meeting to review, discuss, and receive feedback regarding the 2024 provisional budget for the NWPD. This process began in June for the board and will continue on until November. During that time, the board has worked through with the department to fine-tune the budget, moving from an original budget increase high of approximately 11.07% to now what is being proposed, which is a 9% increase. The New Westminster Police Board will have undertaken 6 public meetings of the board and 2 with New Westminster City Council by the time they make their final decision on the 2024 provisional budget. This is the most extensive public process of budget preparation that the board has undertaken and far exceeds any other city department when it comes to the level of detail and information being provided in an open meeting format. The report before you aims to provide an analysis that supports proactive planning and informed decision-making. By identifying key areas of concern and estimating budgetary needs, we can ensure efficient resource allocation, service excellence, and community safety while maintaining transparency regarding our spending needs. Primary objective of the budget is to align with the board's goals and priorities, allowing for effective resource management and the provision of quality services to the community. In light of this, our report highlights several challenges that we anticipate for the upcoming fiscal year. One of the significant concerns is the shortage of operational staff. Although the department currently has a budget for 114 sworn police officers, this number fails to accurately reflect the number of deployable members due to various factors such as the police academy recruit training, maternity and paternity leaves, and long-term illness. Moreover, the recruiting challenges faced by police agencies across British Columbia and the country add to the difficulty of timely replacements. The competition for recruiting staff has intensified due to the province recommendation to transition to the Surrey Police Service, the Vancouver Police Department's approved budget allocation for additional sworn officers, and the BCRCMP's move to fill vacancies. These factors put increased pressure on the budget as efforts to attract and retain qualified personnel becomes more demanding and potentially costly. This report builds on the board's 3-year plan it initiated last year that looks to address some of these concerns. In addition to staffing shortages, the expiration of both the sworn member and civilian staff collective agreements adds uncertainty to the budget. The outcomes of these negotiations will heavily influence the department's financial commitments. It is essential to address these challenges to ensure the effective functioning of the police department and maintain the level of service expected by the community. Furthermore, we must enhance our human resource staff to meet the growing demands of the organization. Currently, the NWPD lacks trained and dedicated human resource management staff, except for our recruiting coordinator. We have completed an assessment and are recommending to the board that a human resource manager be hired who can provide expertise in strategic human resource planning, equity, diversity, inclusion strategies, and to provide skilled leadership in other identified high-risk HR areas. The addition of such a position would enhance our overall human resource management processes and support the department's growth and development. The report also covers other critical budget components, including contracted services, education and training, general office and administration, operating equipment, sales of service, and grants. These areas have their own specific challenges and anticipated budget increases, which we have analyzed and estimated. In conclusion, this overview of potential risk factors and cost increases for the 2024 operational budget allows us to take a proactive approach to budget planning and decision-making. By identifying key challenges such as staffing shortages, collective agreement negotiations, and increased competition for recruiting staff, we can align the budget with the board's goals and priorities effectively. Next slide, please. So what we have planned for you this morning has been broken down into 3 components. The first is a very high-level discussion of what a police board is and what they do. We will then provide a brief overview of some regional comparisons that have been compiled by the Police Services Division of the provincial government. And lastly, we'll then walk council through the most recent report that the department presented to our board containing the proposed 2024 provisional budget. So police governance is very unique in our province and across Canada. Most provinces that I'm aware of try to establish a firewall, if you will, between politics and police. I believe this is the best model to have, but also recognize that it comes with some confusion and stressors. In British Columbia, municipal police departments are overseen by an appointed police board made up of civilian members of the community. Under the Police Act, a municipal police board, in consultation with the chief constable, is required to determine the priorities, goals, and objectives of the police department. The Police Act requires that the board consist of the mayor, who is designated as the chair, 1 person nominated by council, and not more than 7 persons appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. The mandate of a police board is to establish and operate a police department in a municipality. The police department is responsible for maintaining order, preventing crime, and enforcing municipal bylaws, provincial laws, and federal criminal code laws. The Police Act establishes 4 main governance functions for the board. The police board is the employer of all sworn and civilian staff of the police department. No one that works for the NWPD is employed by the city, but rather they are employed by the board. The police board has primary financial oversight of the department. The police board establishes priorities and policies that set direction for the department. And lastly, the police board has authority for policy and service complaints. And these are generally complaints that individuals may make about the processes or procedures of the NWPD. One area that is not clearly understood but is laid out in both the Police Act and the board's governance manual is the relationship between the board and the chief. The board hires the chief constable, who in turn is responsible to hire all other staff. Board provides the Chief Constable with direction, usually through our strategic plan, of its priorities, goals, and objectives. The Chief has the right to set policy and procedure in support of the Board's goals. The Board will work with the Chief to develop the strategic plan and annual budget that delivers the ends expected by the Board. The Chief Constable is responsible for selecting the means for the day-to-day management and operation of the Police Department within the ends described in the strategic plan, the annual budget, and any limitations established by the Board. Subject to any limitation statements, the Board may establish the Chief has command of the Police Department and is counsel to the Board acting as a body. The Board authority is delegated through the Chief so that all authority and accountability of staff, insofar as the Board is concerned, is considered to be the authority and accountability of the Chief. Only decisions of the Board acting as a body are binding upon the Chief, not individual direction from a Board member, and the Chief may delegate his authority to others. Another area that's very relevant for our conversation today is the relationship between the Board and the City, and specifically Council. The legislative intent behind the creation of a police board is to ensure that the Police Department remains a separate and independent body from the cities they serve. The police board has a unique relationship, though, with City that exists to insulate the Police Department from the political decision-making process. When the board is determining its priorities, goals, and objectives for the NWPD, they must also take into account, though, the priorities, goals, and objectives for policing and law enforcement in British Columbia established by the Minister, and the priorities, goals, and objectives of the Council of the city in which they serve. The Westminster City Council provides the funding for the operation of the NWPD. This relationship states a collaborative and constructive working relationship between the Police Department, Board, and Council. So that's a really high view of a couple areas of the Police Act and the legislative framework around that. So next, we'll talk about the budget process or the budget timelines that we're facing. So the Police Board is bound by the provincial legislation as to the timeline of when they're required to approve the Police Department budget. The Police Act directs that on or before November 30th, the Board must prepare and submit to Council for its approval a provisional budget for the following year to provide policing and law enforcement in the city. Any changes to the provisional budget must be submitted to Council on or before March 1st of the year to which the provisional budget relates. Council does not approve an item in the budget. The Director of Police Services, on application by Council or the Board, must determine whether the item or amount should be included in the budget and report their findings to both the Board, Council, and the Minister. Council must include in its budget the costs in the provisional budget prepared by the Police Board unless otherwise directed by the Director of Police Services. So now we will get into some regional comparisons, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Highland.
Thanks, Chief, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving us the opportunity to present to you this morning. In your package, you received a number of charts. I'm not going to get into specific detail on all of them. I think they're, for the most part, self-explanatory. What we're trying to do is provide some metrics or some concrete information to guide with the decision-making process, not only for our board, who have seen this information already, in addition to Council. The data, for the most part, is drawn from an annual report done by Police Services through the province. Basically does an analysis of all policing in the province, including RCMP, municipal police departments, policing businesses such as Transit Police and Statlium Police Service. What it does is, so when we're doing our kind of analysis, we don't compare ourselves to the RCMP. We have very different governance model, different funding model. For the most part, RCMP detachments do not have a police board. There's different funding formulas with regards to federal subsidies. So for the purposes of this presentation, the comparators have been comparable municipal police agencies. As the Police Act, we've talked about the Police Act. The Police Act requires that the municipality provide effective and adequate policing for its community, which sounds great. Unfortunately, it's not fairly well defined. So there's not a standard by which mayor and council or police board has to abide by, other than to say you have to maintain community safety. What the data shows, and has showed pretty much across the board over the last 20 years, with regards to the NWPD, we've seen the second lowest budget since 2021. This is per capita. Lowest increases in cost per population, basically what it costs per citizen for the policing services. The second lowest staffing increase, highest rate of population growth, which is seems to be accelerating. and the largest decrease in police officer per population ratio. I just want to flag that to say that there's no single metric that can suggest what it is. Like, there's no standard by which a pop to cop ratio, police officer per 100,000 population ratio. The challenge we have in the Lower Mainland in New Westminster, obviously we're in the geographic center of the Lower Mainland. As you see from the CSI data, I think we sit third amongst comparable municipal agencies, the other two being Victoria and Vancouver. While we're very different in size, what the comparison or the comparator is that we consider ourselves core cities. Vancouver, ourselves, Victoria, we each have dedicated downtown cores. We tend to have what we call flex or surge populations, in that we have at different times during the day significant increases in population, people coming to visit and work. As we all know in New Westminster, significant traffic flow through the community. I don't have the latest stats, but I think it's in the hundreds of thousands of vehicles that are rolling through our community on a daily basis. So these are all the things that we find it challenging. If you were to take New Westminster and put it in the middle of another province on its own, be very different cost pressures. In addition to that, we have 5 SkyTrain stations in the community, a major regional trauma center at Royal Company Hospital, Douglas College, a major post-secondary institution. So again, these all contribute to, the surge populations that we can have at various times. In addition to that, as you'll see from the stats report, which I actually don't have, but the stats report we were presented to our board on Tuesday, our monitored violent offenses are up this year 14% per date, while property offenses are up 2%. Our concern has been all along that property offenses have been underrepresented given some of the challenges we've had with our non-emergency line with ECOM. And also just we're seeing an increase in total calls for service, which are up 11% to date. Again, talking about metrics for policing, there is no single metric from which we can make a determination about what is the appropriate, effective, adequate policing for a community. What we believe the overall data shows is that while New Westminster as a city continues to grow at a rapid pace with regards to population, we as a police department have not kept pace over the years. And correlation does not mean causation, but as the population increases and our staffing and HR remain somewhat stagnant, we have seen a steady increase in crime severity index and just general criminal code offenses, including calls for service. In addition to that, and what we're also seeing is our concern for the effect on our staff and being overworked. Policing is an incredibly complex job. We take young, idealistic individuals and expose them to a very complicated job. They're asked to do many things that arguably are not probably necessarily in the wheelhouse of policing. However, we're here 24/7, 365, and we find ourselves being the agency that's called for this. And while there's certainly an argument to be made about upstream resourcing as it stands now, we're the ones that are responding to much of these calls for service. I would say it's getting, it's being a challenge with sustainability. Our concerns over the summer, it's been extremely busy, increasing calls for service, challenges again with staffing levels. It's never been a more competitive environment to attract and retain police officers. We're seeing less and less people applying for the job. And again, with the introduction of a new significant municipal police department, we've seen a tremendous amount of transferring around, and people can basically pick and choose where it is that they want to police. So all that said, it's just, again, painting a bit of a picture of what the history of our department has been like with regards to growth. And I think we're finding ourselves at a point now where we're trying to right-size the organization to ensure that we're providing the services available to ensure effective and adequate policing for the community. So thanks. I'm not sure if we're taking questions as we go or at the end.
No, we'll do it.
I think it's best we get through your presentation and we'll start a roundtable.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. We're now going to dive into some budget analysis and discussion in the next section. We've separated our budget into 3 sections. We're going to discuss our fixed costs, which include things like contractual obligations. We're going to talk about some non-discretional costs. These are the ones that are passed down to us, for the most part, from outside agencies or from other levels of government. And then we are going to talk about some budget enhancements, which are propose to address some of the needs discussed by my colleagues. So first off, we have non-discretionary fixed costs. These costs are really the bulk of them are our collective agreements, which currently are both expired. The overall impact of the budget is about $1 million for our estimate currently, which results in an overall increase of 3.52%. There are some additional recoveries that will help offset some of the increase. These are from GSD grant funding as well as our secondment recovery. So those are just really an in and out. If we are estimating more expenses, we will estimate more recoveries. There are some additional costs in there for GIBC recruits, which the chief will speak to in a later slide, which is really just to maintain our authorized strength due to known retirements for next year. The next group of slides, we're going to talk about the non-discretionary costs. We've grouped them into common themes, and the first theme that I'm going to talk about is e-com. Again, this year for e-com, we're facing another increase of 26%. This information was recently communicated to us, I believe in July. Previous 5-year forecasts had estimated this year's increase to be about 12%. So this additional increase is above and beyond what we were expecting this time last year. This graph, I just wanted to highlight to everybody to see sort of the impact of what we're facing from e-com, because it has become a substantial part of our budget, now 7% of our overall budget. The increases for the past number of years averaged the 4 to 5% range. In the last couple of years, that you can see that increase is really increased as they tried to right-size their organization. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen our budget double from around $1 million for our dispatch levy to over $2 million.
I'll talk a little bit about the GIBC and the costs associated to that that's risen over the last couple of years. So the GIBC, for those of you who don't know, is where municipal police departments send their new recruits to be trained. And traditionally, the costs of training for the GI were borne by a yearly grant that the province of British Columbia provided, which was just under $2 million a year. And then the recruits themselves pay the tuition that was, right now, it's just over $14,000 a year. The province of BC and the GIBC in 2024 started charging, in 2023 started charging a certain amount to the police departments to send recruits there. So what happened was in May of 2022, police services wrote to police boards and police departments to advise them that as I said, that in 2024 there's going to be about a $22,000 a year cost for every recruit that we sent. So the recruit would pay their tuition, we would pay $22,000. They then sent us, the board, a letter in May of 2022 that advised that it actually wasn't going to happen in 2024, it was going to happen in 2022, and it was going to be retroactive to April of 2022. So last year we had to make some adjustments. We didn't make an entire adjustment because the tuition then changed from $22,000 a year to $23,000 a year. So now where we sit as right now is that for every recruit we send, it costs us $23,215. I will flag that we have not heard from the GI if that cost is going to increase in 2024, so there might be some changes to this budget. And as I said, this budget is still a living document and we still have some time to make adjustments to it. So that may go up if we hear from the GI. So what we have added into this year's budget is we've budgeted for 9 recruits per year is about our average that we had hired. We're anticipating in 2024 the need to hire 14 new recruits, and that's mainly due to a surge of retirements that we are aware of or anticipating coming in 2024. And so 5 additional recruits, the increase of about $116,000 simply to cover off the cost of the tuition for those 5 additional recruits. So Jacqueline's going to continue on.
Okay. So the next slide is about our integrated teams. We've received their 5-year forecast, and based on that, we believe the increase for the 24-25 portion that we know will be about $170,000. For the custodial services, which is our jail guards, we did receive notification in June of their increase, which is $16,000. For the purpose of today's presentation, we haven't prepared a lot of information on secondments. I think we've talked a lot about them in the past. There's additional information in previous open reports that we can refer back to, but for now, we just talked about the budget impact for this year and to save additional room in today's presentation for questions. And the last one we'll talk about within the non-discretionary costs is our grants. Our grants, while we receive a number of smaller civil forfeiture grants, these really are two main grants, which is our gang suppression unit and our traffic fine revenue. During 2022, our traffic fine grant was reduced by $250,000. This grant is not something we can estimate. It's not something we receive information on before. And so during the budget process last year, the board decided to be conservative and reduce our expected grant by about half of that percentage. We were hoping some of it was due to COVID, some of it was going to bounce back up there. And while it did bounce back up, it didn't bounce the whole amount back up. So we're still short this year, $54,000. So just to be conservative, I think that's probably likely, by all indications, our new baseline grant for traffic fine revenue. So we're gonna write that into next year's budget. The other grant that factors into this is the GSU grant funding, which the contract expired in March of 2023. We're in the process of receiving additional information from the province, but as of right now, we haven't factored in any changes for 24 until we have more information. So what does that all mean? It means additional budget ask of 2.4% to all of these factors, which is about $696,000. So just a little graph there to show you how these costs that we really don't have a lot of control over really impact our budget. Comes on to Dave, so more information. This next section is going to focus on the enhancements, which are there to help support all of the we had.
So in 2023, the board initiated a 3-year backfill strategy to address staffing needs and to ensure adequate resources within the department. The NWPD currently has a budget for 114 sworn police officers responsible for policing in Westminster. However, this number includes recruits, those on maternity leave or paternity leave, and those not considered operational. So the actual deployable staff is much lower than that. Currently, as we sit here today, or at least the time of writing this report, the NWPD had 19 non-operational staff due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. The department anticipates an increase in maternity and paternity leaves and an annual average count of police recruits, making it crucial to address the shortage of non-operational staff. During the 2023 budget process, the board initiated the strategy, and we're now requesting $650,000 to move forward with the second year of this proposed 3-year initiative. To be clear, this is not an increase in FTEs. Rather, this is backfilling staff who are still part of the NWPD, but not operational, so that our already low staffing levels are not further eroded. Pass it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. So the NWPD conducted an assessment of its current HR management personnel and abilities to identify potential deficiencies and to define top priority gaps that are having the greatest impact on the NWPD's organizational performance and our ability to achieve our strategic goals. The NWPD is traditionally and currently uses senior police officers who are non-HR professionals to administer core HR management functions. And when needed, we receive support from an HR business partner from the City of New Westminster's HR department. The NWPD does not require these police officers to have any HR management training or experience to perform these roles. Typically, they learn what they need to know on the job from the other police officers and from the civilian supervisors that they supervise. The NWPD has been able to manage non-complex HR management functions using this model. In the past, the NWPD management team has received feedback from the civilians, from the officers who conduct this work, from the civilians that they supervise. And both have expressed concerns about the leadership, succession, and operational challenges created by using this model. Staff again expressed these concerns during the independent operational review of the department in 2021-2022. The review addressed these concerns by providing broad evidence to support a recommendation to hire an HR professional, specifically an HR manager. However, the review did not present sufficient evidence in its report, which presented a challenge for the NWPD to be able to take action on this recommendation. This led to further discussion between the NWPD management team about the need to do a more in-depth assessment of the NWPD's HR management personnel and abilities, which led to this assessment and this report. HR management is a highly specialized, diverse field and profession. The type of HR management positions typically seen in police agencies in the lower mainland of BC are director, senior manager, manager, generalist, or HR business partner, advisor, or associate, and coordinator. HR management positions typically require specific formal post-secondary education as a prerequisite. For example, entry to mid-level positions such as a coordinator typically require a certificate in HR management plus 2 years experience in HR. Mid-level positions such as a generalist or HR business partner can require a bachelor's degree in HR management, as well as a chartered professional in HR designation. And HR manager position qualifications can range from needing to have completed a diploma or bachelor's degree in HR, along with 6 to 10 years of progressive HR experience in addition to a CPHR designation. The NWPD has approximately 186 full-time employees, and it lags behind HR industry best practice benchmarks of having 1.4 full-time staff, HR management staff for every 100 employees. 3 of the 5 comparison police agencies that were reviewed exceed the HR industry best practice benchmark, and 1 agency is just shy of this benchmark. According to this benchmark, the NWPD should have approximately 2.6 full-time HR management staff. We had a conversation with a senior HR manager at another police agency, and they asked us the following question: why does the NWPD use police officers to administer HR management functions when it does not use police officers to administer other specialized functions such as finance, IT, or legal matters? Well, we believe the answer is obvious. The police officers do not have the expertise or capacity to be able to perform these roles, and that these models would not be the most effective, efficient, or economical way to support the NWPD's goals. For these specialized functions, police officers collaborate with these specialized staff to provide the NWPD with the most effective service possible. The report assessed the NWPD's HR management strategy, personnel, and abilities by analyzing the following: the current HR management model, the current staff used to perform HR functions and their responsibilities, specific HR competencies, knowledge and skills, HR staffing ratio and benchmarks and best practices, comparisons of organizational structures in similar sized police agencies, a skills gap analysis and its findings. Then it reviewed options for HR professional positions, including their education and experience requirements. And lastly, an evaluation of the advantages and disadvantages of each HR profession position and the current model. The report identified key gaps in the NWPD's current HR management model, specifically in the areas of HR expertise, staffing levels, strategic planning, workforce planning, learning and development, performance management, career and succession planning, and diversity, equity, and inclusion planning. The report then assessed the potential options to resolve these gaps. The NWPD has been able to function with its current model for many years. However, the recommendation is that the NWPD should develop a sustainable solution to address key gaps and to move its HR management practices from focusing on administrative and transactional tasks and work towards being more strategic, focusing on higher value work to achieve greater organizational impact. The proposed solution is that the NWPD should hire a full-time HR manager position. We believe an HR manager can provide the expertise and capacity to resolve these key HR management gaps identified in the report and can provide advanced strategic HR management functions. The HR manager can be responsible for leading and supporting the NWPD's development and formalization of an HR strategic plan and for addressing the key gaps that were identified in the report. We believe the recommendation to hire a dedicated HR manager aligns closely with achieving the NWPD strategic plan goals and priorities, because many of these goals and priorities are directly associated to HR management functions. We believe our ability to achieve and maintain these goals are also directly associated with the NWPD improving its HR management knowledge, skills, abilities, and staffing capacity. Lastly, if the NWPD hired an HR manager, this will allow the City of New Westminster's HR department to reallocate all of the city's HR business partners' time that is being spent currently on police matters towards city matters. The budget ask for this is $160,000. Next. Next part is I'm going to talk about recruitment trends that we're seeing. First of all, the 3-year average for total employee hiring by the NWPD has increased 58% over the past 3 years. Again, the 3-year average for sworn member hiring has increased 184%. And the 3-year average for civilian employee hiring has decreased 2%. Costs to recruit staff have increased significantly. The 5-year average cost is $131,000 and the 2-year average is $170,000. The reason for the increase in the costs are due to, one, the increase in background investigation costs due to the increased hiring trend, and that security clearance level requirements demand extensive background investigations. These statistics also only show successful candidates. Background investigation costs are incurred for successful and unsuccessful candidates. Budget impact, we are asking for $75,000 increase to support the increased need and demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. This slide here, we're going to present what the overall impacts are. There are a couple of line items in here, mostly for equipment, information technology, and legal that haven't been discussed. These adjustments here are really required for inflation. There was a 3.5% inflation increase last year for these accounts, but we're just finding that the cost pressures within these accounts are exceeding the amount received. We have received some additional revenue this year. There are third-party checks that the police department does for outside parties, and through negotiations, we were able to increase the pricing, which has resulted in additional revenue this year of about $105,000. So we are wanting to use the additional revenue to help offset some of these costs. So overall, the impact of our budget enhancements is a 3% increase, or about $880,000. When we take those 3 groups together, we are presenting a preliminary increase for the 2024 budget of 9%, which results in about a $2.5 million increase for the police department. We wanted to provide this graph here to show you that our annual increases for the past number of years have hovered in the 3 to 4. I think the average is 3.5%, with the lowest being in 2022 at 2.3%. The increases over the past 2 years are a result of our need to right-size the organization, the backfill strategy, and the number of increased costs, as you've seen from ECOM and the JIBC. There are several known risks to the budget. Dave can speak to those. She can speak to those before we finalize our presentation today. But as noted, this is our preliminary first draft budget to council, and there will be more information coming. We're planning on meeting in October again, as well as November. So more information to come.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, everybody. I'm mindful of time. We wanted to keep our presentation at 30 minutes, and we blew that. So that's due to my me talking inflation. You for inflation that she's talking. But I do thanks, Jacqueline. Jacqueline highlighted some of these. I'm not going to go into a big conclusion. Just there are risks still out there. But as Jacqueline said, this isn't the final provisional budget. We still have October. We still have November. We still have another meeting with council, and then ultimately the board will make their final decisions. But as Jacqueline said, we do have the GSU funding, which is a federal grant that goes to the province that then comes down to us. We don't know where that's at, ECOM, JIBC, a few other ones. So I think, Your Worship, with that, we'll conclude our part, and we're obviously here for questions.
Thank you. So, I'll take a speakers list, and I already have at least one person on it. This is a chance for members of council to ask staff from police, and we have a couple of staff here from the city, obviously, to clarify any questions. And we can also, I'm kind of hoping that the police board and the council will be able to have a bit of a back and forth discussion about pressures, and maybe if the members of the police board want to sort of, if questions feel like something anyone on the police board wants to pipe in on, please just sort of let me know, and I'll try to manage the conversation as best I can. Without us being too structured, but I'm not going to let it go too crazy either. So this is a bit of an unusual event with having sort of the two bodies here. So we'll try our best we can. Just raise your hand or virtually, or push your button, or do whatever you need to do to wave me down. But I've already got Councillor Nakagawa and Councillor Campbell on the queue. So Nadine. Yeah, and sorry, folks, please try to be aware of your microphones when you are speaking, just so that everyone online can hear, and so anyone with hearing difficulty can hear you. Thanks.
This setup is a nightmare. This was not what I was coming for or thinking that we were coming for. I think the clerk really heard it. That I think, and I look to the chair of both of our respective bodies about this. I will say for myself, I was hoping for a conversation, thank you for the presentation. It was well laid out and it was informative. I guess I am constantly seeking collaboration, and this just feels like a super formal process where we're just sitting apart from each other. Maybe that was a request on your end, I don't know. But yeah, I want conversation and collaboration and relationship, and this doesn't feel like that to me, and I look to the chair to remedy that in future, because I just think that one of the issues that I have with the police budget is it feels detached from the city. And it is. And like the chief said this, that it is in some ways intentionally detached. But I think it has to be in conversation with the city. And again, the presentation was well laid out. It just is not conversational. So I'm just going to ask the chair to maybe hopefully create opportunities for us to have more informal conversations and relationship building in the future. City Council had a really beautiful opportunity on Monday where the Ethiopian community came in to celebrate the Ethiopian New Year. And we had a coffee ceremony and we shared food and we just sat and chatted, and there wasn't an agenda. And that's what I'm seeking, is something in the spirit of that. So with that said, I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now with this whole setup, because again, I want this to be a conversation. I don't want this to seem like criticism or further like dividing a wedge. So I'll sort of go backwards in my thinking of what I heard. The HR position, that makes really good sense. Something that I hear about policing systems in general is that they feel like really insular and like a really closed loop. And I think having somebody with external expertise, yeah, great. That sounds like that makes sense. A question I have, I feel like I've asked this before, but so the JI, you have to hire people who have taken the JI program, is that correct?
Or similar training that the province lays out. So, if you went to the RCMP depot and we hired an experienced officer, they would recognize that. Or, there's other police academies across the country that would be recognized.
But not within BC.
But not within BC.
That is just wild to me, that you have to essentially hire people or poach from some other police force, and then we're going to charge you for the thing that we're making you have. That is just a wild loop. What other profession works that way? That is just ridiculous. I would comment that we, a couple years back, had a lot of conversations with ECOM about what was going on in their organization. I have heard not much from them lately. I don't know if the mayor has, but I think I would love to hear what's going on for them, because it's troubling. And I think the cost escalation, and the results that we're getting from the cost escalation are not aligned, right? So, yeah. I guess I have a bigger question, and this is somewhat rhetorical, but people are welcome to answer, about the Police Act. So we were, the chief and I and the mayor and other folks were in conversations about potential changes to the Police Act a few years ago. The province put out a final report about it. I haven't heard much about that. I'm not sure if you're hearing anything on your end about if there are real significant changes coming in that piece of legislation.
Yes, you're right. I think so many people, including the city, put a lot of work into those presentations. I know the province has it. The deputy chief sits on a committee with others that's looking at sorry if I'm not talking loud enough. What we've been told at our level, and the mayor might be able to chime in because I don't know if maybe the mayor shared something separately, is they're focusing on governance right now, the recommendations on governance. I think that there was some talk about maybe some changes coming to the Police Act around governance this fall. I don't know if that's going to happen this fall or maybe delayed to the spring. I haven't heard anything official, but that's my understanding of where those changes are. I'm not hearing, and this is just Dave Jansen, not really the chief with any insight on this. I'm not hearing any massive changes to a lot of the areas that Councillor Nakagawa, you specifically are aware of from the city's presentation, but there were so many from other cities and communities and other groups. I haven't heard any talk on that, so I don't know where those are at.
Okay, so you're hearing the same as what I'm hearing, which is not a whole lot. Okay. Yeah, I think this is why I want this to be more of a conversation, because I don't want what I say next to be seen as a criticism of any individuals. It really is a structural issue here that I'm talking about. So there was a comment early on in the presentation about the governance structure being the best and the Police Act laying that out. And the goal of that, the governance structure, is to not have politics, to have politics as separate from policing. And I agree. I think that that's a great idea, but it doesn't feel like that from my side of the table. It feels like what is set up for us to not interfere, but yet that does not mean that politics does not impact policing doesn't impact politics. So for example, in Vancouver, we have a police force, a city police force that, in my view, from arm's length, is very political. Is very political. I'm grateful that we don't have that level of political action in our New West police force, that I see at least. But I will again comment, and I've brought this conversation to the police chief before, about the communications coming out from the police department, which I find deeply troubling. And I will tell you that I did a personal assessment of communications that came out for the 2 years prior to May 2020. Some of us will remember what happened in May 2020 and the 2 years that happened afterwards. And what I saw was a marked increase in what I would describe as fearful communications. And I find that to be really problematic in our community, because I feel that it's contributing to a lot of instability. Like, we went through a couple of years where we didn't see our neighbors, we didn't have community events. We know that there's growing street homelessness, mental health crisis, poison drug supply, all these things. These are very real. These are present in our community. Your members know them better than anybody. And I will say that when we have press release after press release that goes out about violent incidents, and I've seen the framework of decision-making on it, I don't think it's helpful to community. And I find that to be political. So I just want to make that comment, and I make this with, I hope it's taken in the spirit which is given, which is that we all care about our community. We all want the best for our community. We want people to feel safe. We want people to feel taken care of. We want people to feel that this is a city where they belong. I believe that for all of us in this room. And I would just comment that I think that works against it. So this idea that politics is separate from policing is a very great ideal. I don't think that it is the practice. I don't feel it from where I'm sitting on this side of the table. And I would love us to be in more active conversation about these things, about what our goals are from both of our sides, so that we are complementing the work that you're doing, that you're complementing the work we're doing, that we all feel that our voices are heard. And again, that we're building this community where everybody feels safe and that they can belong. So that is not a lot about the police budget, except for about the HR position, which, yeah, sounds good. Happy to support, the advocacy that I'm sure you're already doing on e-com and JI about, accountability there, and the fact that we don't feel that we have a lot of ability to change those numbers. Like, those are numbers that are handed down to us, and that never feels good. So I'll just leave my comments there and just hope that we can be in more casual and collaborative conversation about this, because this just feels for me like I'm being scathing of something that I don't want to be scathing of. I want us to be supporting each other in this work. So I'll just leave it at that.
Maybe I can follow up a bit, like just from the police board side. Yeah, I hear you on the conversation process here, and I wasn't sure really how we were going to set this up, and maybe I could have given more guidance to staff as we were sort of setting this up on how we could do that, and we'll talk about that for future conversations. I will say on e-com, the police board talks about e-com every meeting. Sometimes in closed police board meetings because of our contractual issues, often in open police board meetings, we are talking about it is a constant cause of both strain and concern for the police board, both the level of service and the cost of the service. So that is a constant part of our conversation. So maybe it doesn't come as much back to here at City Council, even though at City Council we have heard similar things from the fire department about level of service and how that service isn't necessarily serving us the way it needs to. The only other thing on the police reform, the one thing that I am and do know that's going on because I'm involved in it is there is a Union of BC Municipalities roundtable that meets monthly, and it is being led by the police services, by the provincial government, and they are bringing people from across British Columbia to have conversations about the recommendations that came through, and we are actually meeting for several hours in these meetings and actually going through the items and trying to make sure that at least the province is trying to understand what everyone across the province is feeling around those changes. I find it positive at times, but at times challenging, especially because of the variety of the way police are governed and operate because there are RCMP covered municipalities there, and there are very few actual municipalities, people representative on there that actually have their own police boards. So it's a bit of a challenge there. They're working through that. I'm not confident that anything big is going to come out of that anytime soon. It is a slow process. So that's probably the best I can say about that, unless, I don't know if anyone else has any other feedback on those items. Do you want to be on the queue?
I wanted to respond to Nadine's.
Absolutely. So, yeah, if you're listening, that'd be good to do. Yeah. I've got basically every other counselor on the queue.
Is that loud enough? Is that okay, Jamie?
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments. I just want to address a couple of them. We had, at our board meeting this week, we had Katie Charlton come from Cabro, which is, for those of you who don't know, the province's department that arranges for nominations at police boards and probably other boards. And I'm sure she does other things, but I don't know what they are. But that question was asked, what is happening with the recommendations from that report? Her answer was fairly vague, I would say. She said that they are working on phase 1, which I do believe is the governance piece. But the thing that stood out for me is she said, it's very slow, which is not surprising, but also troubling. So in the spirit of your comments about collaboration, I absolutely support that. I think that we ought to be meeting more than just about the budget, because the budget really constrains the conversation. And I think there's other things that we could be discussing as a board and a council. And maybe we can also talk about advocating together to the province for the changes that we are both looking for. And I think maybe we don't do that enough. We don't work together as a team to put forward a voice. So I would really look for a way for us to have those times where we can collaborate informally that aren't about numbers and are more about the community and what's working and what's not working. So I think we should do that. So I don't know who's going to start that. I guess you are. So that's
under direction from both the board and the council. Thank you.
That's on you, but yes, let's do that. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone want to follow up on that, or because I have other people on the queue? So I've got Councillor Campbell back is next on the queue. So Ruby.
Thank you. In the spirit of being collaborative, maybe we can just use first names.
Yeah.
Fair? Okay.
We're always stuck because it only has last names. It only has last names here, so I can only manage so many names in my mind.
Okay.
And I will try to use your first name.
Ruby. So why don't we all just use first name?
I'll try as much as I can. Yeah.
Okay, and not his worship. So, thank you to Nadine and Mary. They've kind of addressed some of the questions and observations that I've had, and like Nadine said, you know, this is really weird because like there's this power thing that we're here and you're there, and that's not at all really weird. Like it's just weird. So yeah, non-discretionary download. So in the spirit of collaboration, and Mary mentioned this about advocacy, specifically for me right now around ECOM and JIBC, also the integrated teams. We're going to UBCM next week, and I know that's really like short timing, but even some key messages for us to take away. You know, because there's the organized meetings, but then there's the informal hallway meetings or the meetings at the buffet. You know, so if we can have some collaborative like key messages to take with us, I don't know if it's fair to ask for next week or by Friday, so we can at least read them over the weekend. That would be helpful. So I guess going back to the JIBC training, a question around that. So I don't believe we pay for training for fire or for other staff. So is it even something that we, you know, like, do we need to continue? Is this going to be the practice for us and for all policing? Is it something, I mean, I can see that, you know, if we stop, it will be challenging to recruit, but is there a conversation about that occurring at all?
There's certainly a conversation occurring about the cost.
Okay.
And you know, I can't speak to my colleagues in fire. I think I have a general idea, but I don't want to say something for Aaron that's not true.
Yeah.
But I do, what I can say is that's the model we have here. We
Yeah.
don't have any other options in regards to local training. I do think that many other police departments are looking at this and looking at, you know, the cost that keeps going up. We have no control over it. What would other options be? But at this stage, as we sit here right now, especially going into 2024, this is what we've got. And I think with Councilor Neckar, it is a crazy system because we either pay that or we go steal a member from another police department or another city's put all that money into training that member, and we're taking, it's odd.
And it was odd when they asked for retroactive. I was gobsmacked by that. And I guess
to the choir.
it's just, you know, downloading, right? And I'm wondering if there's a collective conversation around saying, no, we're going to stop paying this.
I know that I've raised it with the board, and I know that the mayor and I have probably had many conversations about this. I think that, and we can certainly put some speaking points forward, is that, you know, where does the province, and I don't mean to throw it in the province, but where does the province sit in this with the changes to Surrey?
Yeah.
And the increase in resources, or sorry, the increase in hiring that's going to have to occur at the JI. Maybe the province as a partner could come to the table to maybe assist a little bit in that, because, you know, that's a whole lot of officers. They're going to need to hire, and capacity and the cost that comes with all that. So I know it's not an easy answer. Right now, it's what we have.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that. I will say that I sit on a committee with other chiefs and leaders, and the province also sits at it, that talks about the JIBC and what we might be able to do, and other advocacy, but we'll see where that goes.
Okay. And I see Aaron went to a mic and wants to say. No.
Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. That'll work. Yeah, just to speak to your point, Chief Jansen, and your point, Ruby, or Councillor Campbell. The fire department does incur costs in training, but it's not through an external provider. So when we do a recruitment, we request that our applicants have certain prerequisites, which they pay for prior to coming into our application process. Then we do internal training. So there is a cost. It's just not through an outside provider like the JI.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting to know.
And I, at our BC Police Conference, have raised this with the minister at the time, because most programs tuition doesn't cover it, right? But advanced education covers that, the other part, whether you're taking a biology degree, I'm a physiotherapist, you're a nurse, right? Like,
yeah.
But why for policing has advanced ed decided to back out and give that to the city? And they don't have a very good answer, because they've kind of just chosen one profession of the like hundreds that we train in this province to not have advanced education cover the difference between the students' tuition and the actual cost of delivering the education.
Even the other people being educated at JI.
Exactly, like paramedics.
Like paramedics, yeah.
So it's interesting because in terms of lobbying, you know, you think you would go to, you know, which minister would you go to? And in this instance, you would never think about going to the advanced education. And so maybe that's where we should be going, right? So that's helpful, yeah. Sorry, I have a few more. So do you think, a couple things about the HR request. Two questions around that. One is, do you think having an HR personnel in-house will help to minimize retirees? Because we know keeping staff is cheaper than training new staff. And maybe you can't speak to that, but do you think that that will help in that instance?
I don't know that it would necessarily help with retirees. I would say that most of our retirees they've done 30 plus years of police service, and it's just, you know, they're now earned their retirement and want to go and enjoy their backyards.
We all do.
Maybe. But I do think, exactly. But I think kind of the spirit of your question is, you know, retention overall. And I think that that's going to be beneficial for many different reasons. We're doing a internal wellness study right now, or a survey. We hired an outside contractor. I think that'll feed up a bunch of information that would be nice to have an HR professional that can then take that data and start building programs, start building different things that will help in making New West the great place it is, keeping it the great place it is, and keep retaining the officers that we have. Because we have an incredible group of individuals that really want to be in this community. Yes, we've lost some folks to other agencies. It happens. But I do think that what we've shown here is that we've got a great place and people want to be here, but we just need to keep building on that and not lose momentum, not lose those folks because, you know, we might slip in an area that we don't even know. I'm not an HR professional. So, you know, I think that that's where it probably would help, more on the retention side, not necessarily on retirement.
Okay. And then I hear that collective bargaining, I guess, you know, is going to be occurring imminent, I guess. So do you think that there's some timing in terms of having an HR professional up and running for that? You know, in terms of making sure that somebody's on side before the collective bargaining starts?
I hope so. That would be my wish.
Do you know the timing on that? Or?
We don't, on the civilian side, that's a QP matter. I think that might be, I'm not up to speed on that, and it would be more, but council might even know because they're all one bargaining unit, basically. On the sworn member side, traditionally, all I can say is traditionally, they follow Vancouver. Vancouver hasn't settled yet, so I'm sure it's going to be later on in the year of 2024. Yeah. So based on timing and recruiting and actually hiring the right person, that would be perfect to have that HR professional, even just to be there. They may not even be up to speed yet in all of what is NWPD, but at least they can be there, start to be part of that first collective bargaining for them.
Okay, and then just a comment and then another question, then I'll stop. So traffic fines reduce the funds from that, reducing, actually it's a good thing. I guess less people are getting tickets, I guess, I don't know, or not. Like that to me, that's not the question, but really it's just an observation, right? Or did you, it looks like you want to say something about that.
Traffic fine revenue isn't just from tickets. So what happens is that all ticket fine money goes to the province. The province has a set amount of how much of that revenue will go out to all of the province.
Got it.
But that pie gets smaller and smaller all the time as communities get larger and go over 5,000 and start, or 15,000. 5,000, thank you. And then they start having to pay for policing costs themselves. They then get access to that cut of the pie. Okay. So the pie may come down a bit, may go up, doesn't really matter because there's only a percentage of all the traffic fine revenue that we're all getting. Yeah. And then we start sharing it with more and more communities.
Awesome, thank you. That was just, that's interesting. And then the last thing is PACT, Peer Assisted Care Team. So now I might be getting into the weeds and that's why this is really weird. I just wanted to ask and I don't know what else to ask. Like, so how is that working with police right now? How do you see that in terms of specifically, I guess, budget and staff morale and, you know, just a general comment on how, what an update would be great. If now is appropriate, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm more than willing to jump in. I won't put Inspector Gossel on the hot seat. Inspector Gossel is one of our inspectors who oversees the division that at least liaison works with. Alman is one of the direct liaisons with PACT. We also have the sergeant that we've assigned that also deals directly with PACT. From my point and from what I've heard from Linda Fletcher Gordon is that things are going well. I think that the collaboration and the communication is good. I haven't been advised of any issues. We are not doing any analytics on our end, but I do know, being part of the development of this, there was a very robust set of analytics that were put in place. I'd be very interested to see how that's going. In our most recent stats that we should have probably included them, we have seen a decline in some areas of the community in our mental health related calls. I can't say that it's directly related to PACT, but you know, I think my hope all along has been, is that PACT gets in place and starts dealing with some of the upstream things so that eventually, and maybe we won't see it in the very short term, I don't know, that we eventually will see a lot less mental health calls. But I've heard nothing from the staff, our frontline officers, that there's any issues, concerns. I couldn't tell you a number of how many folks we've referred to PACT, but all the information is provided to our staff. They know how to go about communicating with them, and from everything I've heard, it's been great.
Awesome, thank you.
One little follow-up maybe on those comments, and it is sort of on the HR operation as it currently is. And it might be useful both from the city side as we're going through our budgeting and on the police board side as we're going through their budgeting, is to get some sense of how much HR resources the police department is using of the city's HR resources in order to support them in their HR function, and whether there's any chance that there'll be an offset on the city's budget on that kind of work. It's one thing that's a bit unique about actually every department in the city has this slightly strange overlap between a lot of functions like IT and administrative functions that they sometimes use more or less for the city depending on the department. And you sort of do your own IT thing. You don't really use our IT services specifically, but you do rely a little bit on some HR services from the city, and there may be some offset if you bring your own folks in board. That'd be an interesting thing to see on both sides, whether we can estimate that, just to put that into context when we have the bigger conversation.
Yeah, we're working, one thing that came out of our last board meeting was that information, and also what it would look like internally if we bring in, or hopefully when we bring in an HR manager, in freeing up resources that we have currently doing some of those roles, so that what can we then offset maybe some other duties to do that. So we're working to build that into the report.
Good, thanks. Next on my list is Councillor Jamie.
Thank you. First, apologies, I'm going to leave early. I have a medical appointment later, so just to let you know. And I got to turn this off or I'll get feedback. So I have about 4 things. The first thing I want to ask is e-com. I know e-com is going to next-gen e-com. I don't know their timeline for that. I know they've received funding for next-gen e-com. But I want to ask the obvious question, would we be better off having local dispatch?
We haven't done a review of that. My first reaction would be no, mainly from a cost, expertise, and staffing point of view. The rollout of where we are currently, as council may know, and the board certainly does know, because we seems like talk about it all the time, is we've gone to our own in-house non-emergency Monday to Friday 8 to 4 call answering, and that was quite a process. So then to take on all of the infrastructure, all the costs, next-gen 911 alone is extremely costly. So I think that would be a very large expense and a lot of staffing challenges that would come with it. But I can't say that we've actually done any review of that. But what we have done to ensure to the board that we're doing our due diligence is we are continually, and we certainly did it leading up to the non-emergency one, is looking at other options outside of e-com, because there are some other agencies that have their own in-house. Surrey is an example. Transit Place is another example of what that might look like. Just to, again, I think that, on the 911 side, I think e-com is doing a good job. It's on the non-emergency side that I have issues. And I have a huge issue with the cost increase, because if I continually saw my production go down and I kept coming back with 20 and 30% increases to our budget, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be sitting here anymore. So that's where I have the concern. But I think that in the my short answer to you, which wasn't a short answer, was it would be really expensive.
Okay, and there are options and you're on it. Contracts, we're in a public forum right now, aren't we?
This is a public open meeting, yes.
So I'll frame my questions, but I probably can't answer right now. But in terms of the people who approve the budget and with contracts outstanding, my curiosity is about the risk with those contracts, potentially adding even more cost to what's expected now. And you can't answer that here, so I'll ask a question and get an answer another time.
Maybe if I could, what I would say is that we and the board are well aware of the risks, and that I think that Jacqueline has done a very good job of advising all of us on the risks. We are trying to stay consistent with the city in their approach at this stage, and we'll just have to see where it goes from there. But you're right, it is a risk area, and I don't know where this is going to land. I have no idea.
What is sort of the status of the work related to mental health? And so I'll tell you where I'm at. One is that your predecessor once told us that about 23% of calls are in some way related to mental health. And I think a lot of police agree that police aren't the best mental health response that could exist in our society. But in terms of where we're at right now with 2 officers on mental health, I know that Art went back to patrol. So what's sort of the state of the mental health resources in the police department right now?
Currently have 1 officer assigned to mental health.
And there were 2, right?
There was 2, as you pointed out, one of our officers tenured out of the unit and has gone back to the road. And it comes down to now purely our ability to backfill some non-operational staff to get to the point that Inspector Dudar can free up a body to send.
My last comment is about conversations. Sitting around some tables, having coffee, being in a kitchen, even it is a different kind of conversation, right? What I don't know is I have no idea where the values of board members and the values of council members might coincide or divide, which I think is actually important to having conversations, right? I don't know what we have in common, and I don't know what we don't have in common. And that leads to a more formal discussion, I think. As a counselor, I don't find that the most productive to only comment on budget, right? Because, we balance those requests with every other need in the city. It's good to understand the budget drivers and what's behind it, but I think there are some other conversations to have. When Ruby said, let's call each other by the first name, I realized I wouldn't be able to do that, even though I've seen some of you several times. The first names are board.
We actually have name tags like
I don't know where they are. So those are the first names as far as I know, right? So I just want to repeat the pitch that there might be some value in some other conversations to have. And that's my last comment, and apologies that I have to go.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, I just want to respond. Agreed. Well, as everyone said, this format is not good whatsoever. It would be nice to be sitting around a table, but I think we've flogged that horse to death. Absolutely. As a board, one of our roles is to consider council's priorities and objectives, and I don't see how we can do that without starting to have those conversations that you've referenced, Jamie. I think we do need to get around and just get to know each other a little bit, so we can get clear on what those things are. And this doesn't feel like an ideal venue to get into that conversation.
I see a TWOW in our future.
A what?
TWOW. It's what we now call Soup and Bannock, which is a new action we're doing in the city, where every Wednesday we have a lunch in City Hall, which is invited, and some guests show up and other people from out City Hall come, but it's really just an informal chance to sit across tables with food with people from different departments and just not have any agenda, just get to know each other. I think it's been a really creative shift in City Hall here. So I see something like that in the future for these 2 boards. So thanks. And I have Tasha on the queue.
Am I on?
You're on now.
Okay, even this anyways, but I understand we need to be talking to microphones because lots of people need extra support to hear. I think for me, everyone I think has spoken to the budget points. I'm not going to belabor the points. For me as a new counselor last year, it was surprising. The process was surprising because it felt like we get the police board budget and, let's just call a spade a spade. We can't actually really say that much about it, right? The process for council to oppose the police budget is arduous and long and sets the city up for a lot of risk if a verdict were to come down. Like it's very challenging for council to actually do anything. So it felt like we get this budget and then it's outside the context of all the things that we have to do as a city. And that's how it felt like for me. It's like, well, if the police wants like a 10% hike in property tax, like, do we just not get to do anything else? And I think that felt troublesome to me because it felt like it was outside of, like there's a finite pot of money. And it felt like just outside it, and that's nobody's fault, that's just the process, that it felt like outside of that holistic thinking about how we want to get to where we want to get as a city. And I think the original ask last year was really high. I think it ended up being like 6% or something would be the property tax impact. And that just left me thinking like, well, how do we do all the other things? So I'm glad we're having this conversation early. And yeah, I think that process is still a bit troubling to me because nothing in this budget that you've laid out is inherently like, there's not actually an enormous ask, right, on its own. It's just within the context. You know, the library has its own board too, and I'm sure the library would love to just hand us their wish list, and then we have to base everything around that. So I guess my question is, my hope is that we're just looking at this in the bigger context. And so I look at 9%. I would like to know what that translates to in terms of what the impact on a tax rate would be, and use that as sort of a starting point of like, okay, well, I'm not an accountant. I don't know what that translates to, but I can't say how that's going to fit in with the rest of everything that we have to do as a city, because also our fixed and non-discretionary costs are like also really enormous, right? So yeah, so I guess that's my comment. I'd like to know what that 9% translates to, might translate to based on the current budget. Yeah, and just sort of be mindful of like, we're thinking about these asks in terms of like, there's an enormous amount of need and ask from every department, and just sort of balancing that all together, I think is where I'd like us all to get together. So yeah. I don't know if the acting CFO wants to comment on that
the
now.
Acting CFO wants to put that into context of that. Oh, give me your mic.
Okay, yeah. So I think the proposed increase at this point is around 2.5 million in total.
Yeah.
And it's about 2.5% of property taxes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's just really important for us to think about for all of us to think about, like, that's a 2.5% hike. We had 6.4 last year. What does the rest of, the city's cost? Like, just, I'm not saying no one had that in mind. Obviously you had that in mind, but I think that's important framing for these conversations so that it's not just a standalone thing that's not taking into account all the other needs of the city and the best and most efficient ways for us to get to the end goal, which, as Nadine said, like, we all have the same end goal, right? We want a safe, inclusive, amazing community where everyone can thrive. So those are just my comments, and thank you for that.
Thanks. Any comments or questions or following up on that point? Go ahead, Ruby. I want to say Ruby, that I look down and it says okay. Campbell, and I can't look at Campbell and say Ruby at the same time.
So no, I think that Tasha brought up a good point, and I think as much as possible in the next report is to maybe show what this is in terms of a percentage of the city budget. I don't know if you can do that. I'm not going to pretend to be financially inclined, and the reason is because I think we had a budget survey come back to us, and I think people were a little bit continuing to be surprised how much the police budget is part of the city budget, and I mean, I was surprised, and I think it's just important for the public to know how much this is. So when we are looking at the police budget, and why we're here is because it's a big part of the city budget, right? And I think that in the reports, that would be helpful to know, just to reaffirm, like, is it, I can't remember where we're at. Is it now 29%? I can't remember where we're at. And this could potentially take it to 30%. It's just, I think, helpful in all your stats to reference. Thank you.
Patrick?
I'll drag this over a little bit. Just to respond to what Ruby was mentioning, we had some discussion about this during someone from the city came, I'm reading here, to talk about that survey. And one of the issues I noted is that the police services budget doesn't get any explainers in the graphic that's presented to respondents of the survey. So it simply says police services 29%.
Yeah.
And to members of the public, and I teach this in my intro to policing course at Douglas College, to members of the public, it's police do law enforcement, period. Right? And they don't understand that police services involves a lot of other activities like victim assistance and so on. But, the city gets explainers on that graphic, like HR functions and IT and so on, but it's just police services, which is misleading, I think. It's not giving a complete picture to the public of the scope of activities of the NWPD. And, part of that's on us as a board in terms of communicating with the public, part of that's on NWPD with communicating with the public, but I think some of that's on the survey designers as well. Just to make another comment about budget constraints, I see a bigger problem on the horizon, and we had some discussion about this. Was it in the open session or closed?
It was an open.
Open, okay, good. Before I start saying too much. We had some discussion about this, and that's the statistics that Deputy Chief Highland, Paul, brought up a little while ago in terms of the pot-to-cop ratio, or you can think of it as per 100,000 per capita. As the statistics showed, we're lagging behind the rest of the Lower Mainland in terms of comparator agencies, in terms of the authorized strength, the sworn members that we have. I took a little peek informally into some other smaller urban communities in Ontario that you might be able to compare New West to. We're lagging behind them too. And so if we're talking about controlling the budget on the horizon, at some point with our population continuing to grow here, we're going to need to increase the authorized strength of this police force, or service will start suffering. And Nadine mentioned this earlier, right? Policing has an impact on politics. Well, if we don't increase the authorized strength at some point, surely your constituents will be contacting you and saying, police services are lacking in this community now. And I don't want to wait till that happens. I'm in favor probably of a gradual, I don't speak for the whole board when I'm saying this, by the way, I speak for myself.
No, you don't.
Yes, but I would be in favor of a gradual approach to increasing the authorized strength of this force to bring it in line with some comparator communities. Rather than waiting till the bomb explodes and the public is upset about the level of service here, and then all of a sudden we have to play catch up in a very difficult recruiting environment, as the chief and some other folks here have talked about today. It would be very difficult, I would say, to simply increase numbers rapidly, quickly at the last minute to bring ourselves up to strength with, in comparison to other forces around here or elsewhere. So I see that as a huge problem on the horizon, and if it's about gradually increasing the budget to make it palatable for the city and the constraints you have for, in terms of your budget, that's a discussion that needs to happen now rather than NWPD coming maybe 6 years from now and saying we need 20%, right, to increase our ranks to make it adequate service for this community. Our population continues to grow in New West, and that's not stopping. The forecasts are on the horizon, and at some point we need to have this difficult discussion. Are our services adequate for the size of this city now, or are increases necessary in terms of authorized strength? So thanks, that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks. Can I add something too? I just want to go back to the survey and the 29%. And it's something that I've talked about before. The board's heard me talk about it. But I just think it's fair that we all recognize something. Those numbers are put out there. That is the total cost of policing. That includes IT, HR, comms, everything. Then we're compared to, I don't know, I'll pick fire. Sorry, Aaron, he's there. But fire.
There we go.
Let's just take X city department.
Always pick
I know they will. Take X city department.
Yep.
That doesn't include IT.
Yeah.
That doesn't include HR. It doesn't include communication. Those are all separate things within the city budget. So we're truly not 29%, or we're 29%, but some of those other departments are much more. So we are doing some work to extract some of that comparable sections or resourcing or money out of our budget so that we then can say, here's what we see that we are if you compare us to Parks and Rec or Engineering. So I just want everyone to bear that in mind when we go through it. It's always a hard comparable. We get to comments, that discussion gets thrown in there. There's a bunch of variables with the police. We are very unique. We totally get that. And it's going to be hard for anyone to try to give an exact number. But 29% is just not accurate when you compare us to something that's being judged in a completely different way.
And, you know, that's really helpful because I think it goes back to, you know, again, not getting into the weeds, but what Tesha said, like with the library board, we get to see the breakdown. With the police, we don't really see the breakdown, and the public doesn't see the breakdown. So if you don't, you know, if you don't know, how can we help you change? How can we support you? You know, and I think that would be helpful, at least for me. Yeah. So thank you.
Heather?
I feel like we do show this in almost all of our board meetings to the public.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
More than any other department.
Yeah, we show it in tables and such. And maybe the point is we don't necessarily in city communications, we still have the pie chart where police is 29% instead of actually breaking that up into another pie chart and showing that. Yeah, so we produce it publicly. We don't necessarily produce it in a way that people easily absorb and understand what the actual numbers are.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, being on the police board, I remember seeing it, but when you get it at council, it's all lumped up. So, and unfortunately, or fortunately, Jacqueline is now like, you know, kind of here and there. So maybe there's a way, meaning, you know, in the city and in the police department, maybe there's, in her spare time, there's a way that that can be reflected. I don't know. But thank you. Thank you.
We've been working on it.
Yeah.
Got some preliminary work done.
Awesome.
Thanks. Okay, I have Councillor Midhouse in the queue. Sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Patrick. I want to thank the staff. Great report. I've seen, felt, watched so much for the last almost 45 years on the street. It is mind-boggling as to what you guys put up with, how professional you guys are at what you guys do and everything else. So I want to thank you guys for that first. Secondly, the report, I think it's great. There is, when I look at it, I was talking to
Andrew.
Sorry.
Not staff.
Yeah. This morning I had to read certain things 2 or 3 times over, just trying to understand. And I'm just flabbergasted at some of the stuff as far as the crime or some of the stats that are in there. I can clearly see with the shortages and everything else that you guys have, challenges that you guys have. I can see the request on the budget side of it. And I agree the way Patrick, I hope I got the name right, what Patrick mentioned. If we don't deal with some of these things now, sweeping it under the carpet and for some other day is going to be a major problem down the road. And I've seen this, especially the last 7, 8 years, as to how things have transpired. I'm well aware of everything that's going on, not just downtown, but it's uptown, even in Queensboro or Saperton. But these challenges are not just going to go away, especially with the population growth that Patrick has been talking about. And the growth is not necessarily our city growing, but the commute within the city. And the growth on especially the SkyTrain line for a small city that has 5 SkyTrain stations. It's a lot of traffic where people move around. And for the police to be stretched out, it's challenging for them, and I fully understand that. But I totally agree with Patrick, what you mentioned, that if we don't address the issue now, we will be asking, or the police will be asking for a much higher ask down the road. So it's better to address it slowly as we move forward than to have major problems arise, and then we are dealing with that at that particular moment on the spot. So I totally agree with Patrick and his part. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I don't know if we have any other comments or questions, or if there's any feedback that anyone wants to provide, either from between the two boards or from staff, or I guess I would, in my one feedback I would give to you is that, yeah, I will have a chat with the police, between the police board and council, about how we can maybe have another form of meeting. I think part of it might be also centering ourselves as two organizations, or as a group of people, instead of, no offense, centering staff in the conversation, having them lead the conversation. Maybe we need to have a chance to have a conversation with each other about our pressures and stresses, and the way and our visions where we see our two organizations going and working together. I think that might be a useful conversation for us to have. Yeah, Patrick.
Just one quick comment again, just to remind council that under the Police Act, boards are limited in terms of our scope, so we cannot influence operations. That's strictly up to NWPD and the chief in terms of how daily operations run. We're just responsible for strategy, the budget, and so on. So discussions, we're limited in terms of exactly what we're able to do, what our powers are. Thank you.
Yeah, and on the subject of limitations, I'm also challenged a little bit with the limitations that we have as a council of being able to meet and talk about city business as a group without a constituted meeting with someone taking minutes, and the police board has the same restrictions, where if the police board gets together to talk about police board business, we have to have it a constituted meeting which has minute taking and that type of thing. But we can figure out a way to sort of make that work and have some staff on to support us in having those meetings, but without making it as formal as this. I think we'll just have to think a little bit creatively about how to do that. Yeah, because we weren't advancing city business and having the Ethiopian community come in. I think when we had the Ethiopian community come in for a coffee ceremony, talk to us about what their community was doing, and we weren't really advancing city business in any sense. Maybe the CEO wants to comment on that. I don't know,
Well, I think before we sort of talk about the city business part, in terms of, there's a desire for this to be a more collaborative forum, but I think we need to work backwards. So the police and the board have an obligation to meet a November 30th deadline. The deadline imposed by the province. I think it's early, and so if there is common interest to work together, I would start looking at scheduling probably a couple more meetings between now and, I don't know, second week of November, first week of November, that don't look like this, that are probably more workshop related, and to keep working through issues, because at the end of the day, that November 30th date is a hard deadline. And so I think it's about getting some time together. I think also looking at some common agendas, and then find ways that you can collaborate that are also beyond non-discretionary issues of a budget, because that's really limiting as well. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and recognizing that's also a deadline for this year, but your organizations are going to be working together in the years going forward. I think the idea is to start to create systems where we're actually being more collaborative in the longer term. Yeah, Patrick?
Just one more quick comment to that, and just a reminder, police board members are unpaid volunteers. Several of us are in career, and we're full-time in addition to serving on this board, so our time is limited.
Taking a day off today to come and do this.
Yeah, so schedules will have to align in that respect, in some way, just to remind council that this is not our jobs.
And that is a significant part of actually the conversation we're having about police governance in the province, both through the UBCM and even in our board, we're having a bit of discussion about that, about what does it actually mean to have volunteers taking on a significant responsibility if we want the police board to be more effective advocates for the community and more effective face of the police department to the community. It's a question of time and resources and how far can we actually expect volunteers to do that work. At some point, responsible governance requires compensated governance in order to make sure that people can dedicate the time and energy they need to do it. So that, and yeah, it also acts, absolutely, it actually acts as a barrier to people who can actually serve in those roles, in that governance, to those who can afford to take a day off work and not have to worry about childcare, not have to worry about other responsibilities. So that is an ongoing and active conversation. Thanks. Ruby, did you have another?
Yeah, just something for the report. So
oh, sorry.
Sorry, thanks. Some of the other reports we get from other departments, sometimes they ask us some pointed questions to help us with the discussion, right? And so I think and maybe I'm wrong, just whatever, just take it away as for consideration, because we do need to move through this work, right? We have a deadline. So we can share lots of comments, but there might be some specific questions that you have for us in terms of which way you go with the budget. It would be helpful for us to maybe be asked that in the report. We can share other things, but I just hate for you to go away and say, well, they never told us how to do this or never gave us comment on that. So if you want comment on specific things, maybe put it in the report.
Drew?
I agreed, Ruby, but I think it goes both ways. I think council has an opportunity to present or pose questions to us as a board as well. I think it's a two-way
So maybe in addition to, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
maybe in addition to, give us a few questions and then we give comments. I just hate, I don't know.
You can also give questions, not just us giving questions and council giving comments.
Okay, because I'd hate for you to go away today thinking, well, we didn't hear on such and such and you wanted to hear. So
yeah, and we have to consider council's priorities, and it would be nice to have a list somewhere of what are council's priorities in relation to the budget.
I can give you a copy of our strategic priorities, our strategic what do we call it?
Strategic plan.
Our strategic plan for the county. Yeah, we just completed last year. I can give you the short version or the long version. Both documents are available online, and we can make sure you have them.
I do have one last thing before.
Sure.
Or when we get.
Yeah, we're good, Chief.
I just wanted to thank my staff and everyone here for taking part. Obviously, I think my fellow directors know that these reports don't get written just by us. And one of my staff that is in charge of finance has been doing a couple of different things. So I want to thank them because this is a lot of work. We're trying our darndest. I want everyone to know that. And I know the board has, in a very nice way, reiterated it to me as a chief that we want to be as transparent as we possibly can. I hear a lot of conversation at this table about collaboration, and I hope council knows that that's our style. I as a chief, and I know all of my command staff, all of our staff, that it's not our style to be a confrontation. I know sometimes we'll have differences of opinion, and we're fine with that. We want to hear those differences of opinion. I think that's the only way that we're going to grow. But we're here to work together and hopefully come to a unified agreement on things like the budget so that there isn't, and I think, Tasha, you may even talk about it, when you get into that conflict, it gets messy and it gets drawn out and winners and losers, and that doesn't help any of us. It certainly doesn't help the people that we're all here to serve. So I just want everyone to know that, but thanks very much for everyone's time and for my staff for doing all this work.
Yep, thank you. So I will, unless there's any other questions or comments, I think we can probably convene this. I know that Councilor Nacko is going to get running, and we should probably convene this meeting. But thank you for the feedback and from both sides. Thank you to the City Council for taking the time. Thank you to the Police Board for taking the time and ongoing conversations. Thanks. And I will call for adjournment.
Thanks, everybody. Probably one of the more